I feel like the best person to be their engineer for is probably Lewis or Alonso, because I feel like they're very clear on the radio.
Yeah,
like,
but
you
Lewis
can hear
would
what they're
drive
saying.
me bonkers of his complaining. Oh, God.
But, like, you can hear them.
Yeah,
you can hear
but
them.
do you want to?
And, like...
Hi everyone, and welcome back to Grid Gals. This is episode 4, and we just watched the Saudi Arabia 2023 GP. What'd you think, ladies?
I obviously loved it.
Did you?
Yes.
Even though Max started from 15th and also didn't win.
Yeah. I mean, he still worked his way all the way up, and I feel like it created a lot of drama at Red Bull, which, like, even as a Red Bull fan, kind of liking it. I thought I was going to sit down and have, you know, 2 happy grid gals here, and I think I did, but it wasn't the 2 grid gals that I was expecting.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I expected Mary to be very happy, as well as myself, obviously.
I'm not saying I'm not happy. I'm just kidding.
Oh, you're referring to the Alonso switcheroo.
Now that we figured out who actually took 3rd place,
Well, yeah.
and Jack has solidified her allegiance to Mercedes, I think Jack...
Okay, I feel like the FIA this year, right? Like the penalties, it's interesting. The commentators were talking about this throughout the race too, because they even said, and they looked on the cameras, it's the same penalty that Ocon got last race that was given to Alonso from starting outside of technically his grid spot. Mm-hmm. Unlike Ocon, he didn't start forward. He was like a little too far to the left. So they were saying, you know, there's no advantage that would be gained from that in dry, normal conditions, which this race was. But then the same thing happened where, okay, he got a 5-second penalty for that. He served it at his next pit stop, which happened to be under a safety car. And so they thought, like, okay, we're still serving the 5-second penalty. He didn't really, you know, it didn't impact his race because it was under a safety car. But then during the race, they were talking about, like, okay, even if that 5-second penalty gets reapplied, just make sure that your gap to Russell is more than 5 seconds, which it was. Mm-hmm. But then the FIA came back with a 10-second penalty because they said he didn't serve it correctly, and that's exactly what happened to Ocon.
Yeah.
And I just feel like the FIA has been real trigger happy on these penalties. Like, they were even saying, like, we can't remember the last time this many people were getting these types of penalties.
Yeah. I think the new FIA is coming out, like, very strong. You know how they kind of did a rehaul after the 2020 season, 2021 season? And so I kind of have a hot take on this. Like, I actually like this. I think it keeps the race a little bit more spicy because the FIA is coming out with different penalties, different points in time. And I get the penalty on Alonso, though. Like, even though he didn't get an advantage in it, you should just be applying it evenly across all cars, across all drivers.
But I think what was confusing and what I think was slightly unfair about the situation, I don't think it's, like, tremendously unfair, but both Mercedes and Aston Martin were clearly, like, flipping through the rule book. And so I feel like the fact that the rule wasn't made clear enough that the teams could make that decision during the race. You know, like, it did all come down to the stewards after the fact. And, like, clearly this decision sets a precedent and does clarify it going forward. But I feel like that's what's frustrating is they thought, like, okay, maybe the 5 seconds would be reapplied, but then to add the other 10 seconds, you know, like, it just felt a little unclear.
Well, what was the 10 seconds for? Because was it for them not serving it correctly? Like, they touched the car during the 5 seconds?
No, they're
or
saying... Or
was it because they served it under the safety car?
Yeah, that's what they were saying. Because they served it under the safety car, they didn't serve it correctly.
Oh, I heard it was because they touched. Because they replayed a clip and they saw. I think
that's different.
I think they originally made the argument that it was because it was served under a safety car, but then at least the commentators were replaying clips. I didn't hear if they had made a determination from rewatching the footage if they believed it was the Aston Martin pit team touching the car within the 5-second time penalty, but at least that's what I had taken away from the conversation.
See, that makes more sense because I was going to say if they truly said he didn't serve it correctly because it was under a safety car, that part wasn't clear in the rule book. Yeah. So it doesn't feel fair to be held to that. If the team touched the car, and again, I mean, I didn't see the clips, so I don't know. That's different, right? Like, we know you can't touch it. That basically negates you serving it.
Yeah.
Makes sense, but...
And it's fair because the same thing happened with Ocon the week before, so you saw it applied again. If the team did touch the car within the 5 seconds, then I think it was applied fair. I agree that it's a change from last season because we didn't really... I'm sure this happened. They probably just weren't watching the car and timing things as closely as they are this season.
The other, speaking of not quite penalties, but things that I saw a lot of the FIA like narrowing in on, especially in this race, was waving the black and white flag for people, quote-unquote, weaving. It was when Leclerc was following Hamilton trying to pass. Leclerc was far enough behind that, you know, it wasn't like he was within DRS or whatever, but they did say that Hamilton was weaving enough to try to break the toe. And so he did get flagged, not a penalty, you know, but warned. And then someone else got warned too. Somebody like towards the back of the pack, maybe it was Magnussen or Hulkenberg, one of them, I feel like. But again, just kind of interesting calls where it feels like the FIA is focusing a lot on kind of specific rules that we haven't seen enforced as strongly in the past.
Yeah. But I like that they're starting to set this precedent now. You know, when we get later in the season and like
True.
It's high intensity and you see like one of the top drivers get one of these penalties, then it's not just going to be like, oh, they're just doing it because they're only paying attention to these drivers. Hamilton was what, like 9th at that point or 7th? And it's still like, okay, they're applying it all down the grid, which I think is kind of fun.
Yeah, and I did hear the commentators say that coming into this weekend, all of the drivers were handed like kind of a printout from the FIA with some of the things they would be focusing on. And one of them, the FIA told the drivers, we're going to be really strict about track limits this weekend. Like, do not mess around if you are off. And I think the one that like absolutely killed me to see for track limits was Logan Sargent during qualifying. He set an amazing time, like had this just incredible flying lap. Would have easily made it through to Q2. I mean...
Yeah, he would have. That's what they were saying.
Yeah.
It was a good lap even for Q2.
Yeah, and I mean, especially for a Williams, like, amazing time. And then for that to get pulled, and he basically just didn't have any sort of competitive time at that point. You know, he's like plus 40 seconds or whatever. But that was a bummer.
That was probably one of my biggest takeaways from qualifying. Besides, obviously.
Besides Max getting out in Q2 because his car died?
Listen, I'm trying to pay attention to the rest of the grid this year. It's a personal goal.
The clips of the Red Bull garage during Q2 were just an unmatched level of chaos. It was hysterical to watch.
It was bad. I mean, the memes afterwards, though, there's a lot of like, oh, Verstappen just did this to make the race a little bit more interesting. Or there was some with like Checo got to the car.
Yeah, they switched the engines without him knowing.
Yep.
I think at one point, because they obviously have camera crews in each of the garages, someone in the Red Bull garage like shoved the cameraman out of the way because they were trying to, I mean, they only had a matter of minutes left in that qualifying session, so they're trying to do everything they can to make sure that the car is ready to get back out so he could do his flying lap.
Yeah.
And it was just pure, that's when you knew that it was just, they had not prepared for this. It was, you know, usually we see a lot of composure from Red Bull. There's not a lot of things that they aren't calm and collected to handle. Not saying that there's not chaos going on during every race, but you could really see that they were frazzled.
I feel like the other garage that was all over the place during quali, McLaren. Because you have Lando, like, I mean, again, that car, I feel bad for Lando. But, on the other hand, Piastri made it through to Q3. And, like, who saw that coming, right?
Yeah.
Especially after Bahrain, I didn't think either of them were going to even make it into Q2. And so... You know, and I mean, Piastri did outperform Norris in the race as well. Which, I mean, I think a lot of it is also the car, right? Like, we know Lando's talented, but...
I think what sucked with both the qualifying and race for McLaren was, I think Lando hit a curb really hard, damaged his car, so that's why he ended up so low in qualifying. But still, like, driver error, so on him, right? And then in the race, Piastri got damaged within like the first lap, and so he had to pit immediately, but then his damage, I think Norris ran over or got in his car or something.
It hit Norris.
So he had to go get, I think maybe his tire was punctured or something, so he had to go get new tires on. Just like an absolute cluster from them.
Which especially kind of wild, the odds of that happening, given that Piastri started 9th. and Lando starts 19th.
Yeah.
So there's 10 grid places in between your two drivers, and that the debris from your front driver just happens to fly back and hit your second driver.
All the way back. And I would feel bad for Piastri for losing all those places, but he's not on my list.
I feel like he's on one of your lists, just not the good one.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of our predictions that we talked about last week some of them are starting to pan out, and I think the McLaren one, absolutely, you saw towards the end of the race, there was some tension between the two McLarens. Like, Lando was comfortably in the lead. At this point, they're not competing for points. They're not going to get in the points in the last couple of laps. So it was De Vries, Sargent, and the two McLarens, and De Vries came on top of that battle, but then the last couple of laps, they were obviously focusing on the front of the race, and something happened, and Piastri ended up jumping up a couple spots and passed Sargent and Norris, and I'm not sure if he ended up passing De Vries as well, but I feel like there was a bunch of tension towards that backpack, and I'm really curious what's happening in the McLaren team after the fact, because I think there was a lot of tension going on between Norris and Piastri.
Yeah, I believe it. One of the things I did notice towards the end of the race, even as I was just watching up and down the grid, it looked like almost every team, their drivers were next to each other. There were a couple teams that were split. Actually, Alfa Romeo, AlphaTauri had their drivers split. Mm-hmm. But, you had both the Red Bulls at the front. You had, Stroll DNF'd, which, again, actually, to follow up with the prediction of, is Stroll going to crash how many times this season? Stroll DNF'd, but it was a car failure. So, that was where we got the safety car from. Okay, but then you had Alonso, you had the two Mercedes, you had the two Ferraris further down the pack, you had the two Alpines, you had the two McLarens. The teams were running in those kind of chunks together, which was kind of interesting to just see on the grid. I feel like you don't usually see that many team pairs together all the way up and down.
Yeah, and I feel like unless you're 1-2, which maybe this doesn't actually play out for what I'm trying to say right now, but unless you're 1-2, I feel like it creates a lot of drama to be next to your teammate. And granted, I think 1-2 on this race created a lot of drama, but the McLarens, the Ferraris, they had a lot of drama between their two drivers because Leclerc was much faster than Sainz and was stuck behind Sainz for a while, was asking to pretty much get team orders to move around him.
Well, and I think one of the things that was kind of frustrating, especially, being a Ferrari fan, was Leclerc performed very well this weekend. Even back in qualifying, got P2, started further down the grid, obviously. Unfortunately, already has taken a grid penalty for his car, which, God bless Ferrari, am I right? But because of that, he had a great race. He wasn't quite as far back as Max, per se, but, crawling all the way back up the order. And then, just to get stuck behind your teammate who's, slightly slower intervals. Sainz, I thought, performed, relatively well. He didn't completely screwed up. He didn't run into the wall or anything. Qualified, I think, 5th? So he started 4th because Leclerc got dropped down. But even then, you're like, come on, guys. I think where'd they end up? 6th and 7th?
Was that it? At the end?
Yeah, it's not where I wanted to see Ferrari, that's for sure.
Wow.
Behind the Mercs. Yeah. Well, and a very unfortunate circumstance, obviously, when a safety car comes out, usually a lot of teams use that to their advantage to change tires. And unfortunately, for the first safety car, Leclerc had just pitted right before that.
Yeah.
So obviously, no one has a crystal ball, couldn't have seen that coming, but it just another example of just terrible luck for Ferrari.
The man, not even just Ferrari, but specifically Charles Leclerc.
Yeah.
This man has the worst luck when it comes to safety cars. I swear he always gets screwed. If you want a safety car to come out for your team, just be like, well, did Leclerc just pit? Because we're probably going to get a safety car.
There was something else that I heard briefly that I wanted to go back and listen to, but I don't know if you caught when either Hamilton went in and pitted or something like that, and Leclerc's race engineers told him too delayed or something. And Leclerc actually got upset with his engineer, and he was like, you guys need to be telling me that information much sooner than you are right now. But I don't know what it was about.
I want to go back. No, I know what you're talking about. I didn't catch it. But, I feel this goes back to the whole problem of last year, and we were hoping a new team principal would help with some of these strategy misses. But maybe it's honestly just the communication between him as a driver and his engineer. Because I feel like we've seen this time and time again with Leclerc of he just doesn't get the information he needs, or they just make a bad call and he listens to them.
Right.
You know, so like it's just so frustrating because you're like, clearly he's talented and like he's trying to make the most of the car, which granted they're certainly not really helping him in that regard, given that he had to already take a 10-place grid penalty. But yeah, it's just, you know, another fun day as a Ferrari fan.
So, Jack, question for you, now that you're a Mercedes fan.
Still weird to hear that.
What was Hamilton's deal during qualifying and in the race? I mean...
Oh, I'm sorry, wait, did everyone catch the one featured radio message from Hamilton? Because obviously now that he's not the top of the pile, they're not playing his radio as much on the broadcast. Yeah. But did everyone catch the one message we did hear from him today?
Complain about the tires?
Absolutely. Yeah. It was a classic. These tires suck, man.
He's nothing if not consistent. I will give him that.
Well,
Copy that.
Well, I was wondering if you think it's because his longtime trainer and life coach and best friend, Angela, is now departing.
I was wondering if that was going to have an effect on him. I mean, obviously they have a very close friendship. You do gain that sort of friendship when you've been working with someone that closely for so long. So I'm sure that has part to do with it. I'm sure also too, right, we didn't see him in the first race coming out and doing anything spectacular, right? So it could just mean that he's, you know, the Mercedes car is looking strong. But maybe he's just not high on his mojo. He's maybe really not back in it yet. I mean, Russell's been doing really well. He's always been a consistent driver. So I hope that he shifts his attitude, though. I'd love to see him get back up on the podium.
Guys, I'm going to miss Angela.
Yeah.
Like, that was some prime paddock content, you know? Like, you could always... And she's easy to spot in a crowd.
She is.
Little platinum blonde running around, like...
And I feel like she's the only female trainer for any of the drivers on the grid. I mean, maybe there's another one that I don't know about, but I think she might be the only one.
I definitely haven't seen any others that stick out to me as women. You know, we'll definitely see women in the garage doing other types of things, whether I think I've seen a couple on the pit crew, you see some engineers, but in terms of like actual trainers, I don't think so. And it is International Women's Month, so Angela, we miss you.
I know, I wonder if she's going to finish out the season, or I don't know.
I think she's done... I mean, it's got to be hard, right? Like, I think she has a family. I think she's married with kids.
Yeah.
And so to be away from your family, I mean, obviously it's hard on everybody in this sport with the amount of travel, but I could see that just getting really, really grueling.
It seemed pretty effective immediately, at least the way that they wrote the goodbye messages. It didn't seem like, oh, this is the last season, Angela and I will be working together. And I did think it was interesting timing, knowing that we just started a season.
Right.
It wasn't... Mid-season, I could maybe understand an abrupt departure a little bit more. And maybe she just thought that she could handle another season. And, you know, something happened, things change, right? Maybe she does feel the need to be more present and more at home for her family. Or maybe there are other personal, professional things that she wants to pursue and got an opportunity or something. It seemed very professional focused when he wrote the message about like excited to see you achieve your dreams. So
that also just like sounds like him, you know?
Yeah, it does sound like him too. So I'm like, that could just be you know, providing your well wishes like you would anyone else. But it did seem like maybe she got a different opportunity that she was excited about.
Yeah.
It definitely didn't sound like a negative departure.
Right. No.
Whether it was like circumstantial if she had something come up in her life, because I could see that, like especially if you have a personal or familial thing where it's like, okay, my situation has changed, like I can't do this job anymore, or like you were saying, you know, maybe she got some amazing opportunity. It did seem like a very genuine positive send off.
Yeah.
But I'm sure it's impacting his mental health. I feel like she was more than just, you know, a physical trainer, right? Like I feel like she really helped ground him.
When we did the episode last season about how the drivers train, I think a lot of it is that having the right headspace. And when you have someone who's been in your life consistently helping you train, and one of those components is, you know, making you mentally strong, I'm sure that is a little bit of a shake-up to the psyche.
Yeah. I was just trying to give him a little bit of excuse for his performance this weekend.
That was another one where I was texting the gals during the race, and there were a couple things that we talked about in our prediction episode last week that were just not working in my favor this week. I felt like that was one of them, especially seeing, and granted, you know, there wasn't a huge gap between Russell and Hamilton. I think with the Alonso penalty, Russell finished third, Hamilton finished fifth, but they were, you know, back-to-back for most of the race.
Yeah. Are we ready to move on to the front of the grid?
I was just about to ask. I'm like,
sitting here very patiently.
I'm kind of surprised we haven't talked about your boys yet.
A lot of fun facts
Jack has
written
a
down.
full page of notes on this. Sure. Do you want to take it away, Jack?
Well, I thought there was a really fun stat that was listed off when they were talking about Perez leading the race, and he led the majority of the race. I think there was one little blip where Alonso pulled ahead, but other than that, he was he was solidly in first.
Yep.
Max hasn't finished second to his teammate since a race against Danny Rick in 2016.
Oh, yikes!
What a stat! That is, I mean, we know.
That's second to a teammate. That means he could have finished lower.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. But second with a 1-2. And I think they were talking more of his teammate hasn't finished in first and him in second. I don't think likely.
Because I was going to say, like,
when I don't think they were counting DNFs. Like, obviously he's DNF'd, but more like he's in the race, competing, didn't have a significant engine failure. That hasn't happened since 2016, which is a little wild.
Yeah, and I don't think either of the drivers were happy when they got out of the car. I don't know if you guys watched that little, I don't know what we call that little room that they go into.
Post-race cool down or something?
Yeah, the cool down room.
Yeah.
But they legitimately did not even speak until a little bit later when when Checo's like, you took fastest lap. And Max is like, oh yeah, I just, decided to really throw it in the last lap. And did you see when Checo was told that he lost fastest lap? Because it was the commentator or the interviewer interviewing him about winning, and he was like, how do you feel that your teammate took fastest lap? And you could just see it go across his face.
Well, and for those of you listening at home, I think a little bit of context that's important here is, had Checo gotten the fastest lap on top of the first place, would have put him in first place for the World Drivers' Championship, which would have made him the first Mexican driver to be in the lead of the championship since, like, the 1960s.
Yeah.
And so, like, there's all this other context, too. I mean, obviously, he also just, like, wants to beat Max. Mm-hmm. And, like, yes, he beat him in the race, but Max is still technically or are they tied?
No, he's leading.
Okay, so he's still leading. I mean, incrementally, right? But
1 point. Yep.
Yeah.
It's the one point that he got from fastest lap. And I will say that I think the team was actually pretty fair with both Checo and Max, because at first I was like, I think they're trying to slow Checo down, but then they also wouldn't tell Max what the fastest lap was. So Max got on the radio and was like, what's fastest lap? What are we going for? And they're like, don't worry about it. Wouldn't tell him the time that he has to beat. Wouldn't tell him who has the fastest lap, which I obviously think was on purpose, because I think they were trying to give it to Checo.
Or at least be neutral, right? And be like, whoever gets it, gets it. We're not going to intervene in determining that. I don't. But what was funny, did you see earlier in the race when they were talking about the pace and they told Checo, they're like, okay, in this sector we need like a 32.6 plus 4. Mm-hmm. And he was like, plus 4? Why would it be a plus 4? And they're like, well, Max is doing, a 32.6. And he's like, so why would I be like 4/10 off Max's pace? And then both of them go and do like 32.3s. So they're both like, oh, I'm not slowing down. I'm not matching. Because I think they were also worried at one point about Max's car again.
I think they were worried about both cars because Checo got on and was saying stuff about the brakes, and they're like, that's just normal degradation on this type of circuit. So I think both the teams were actually just trying to preserve the cars. Yeah. I don't think they were trying to get them closer together, or like one in front of the other.
That was funny though, because even the commentators were like, yeah, so the team's not going to be happy about that. Yeah. Like, they're literally pushing these cars like out of spite for each other, to the point where maybe it was teetering on the edge of like, you could be burning this car out.
Yeah, because you're winning the race. You're both. Yeah. It's a 1-2 no matter what. this car needs to last. You can't just, I don't want to see the car like get a ton of points at the beginning of the season, and then because of the budget cap or whatever, they can't get new parts on the cars and they're in trouble.
But I also respect it so much where like,
of course,
these guys are straight up like, I'm here because I am so competitive, and this is like the most competitive motorsport league in the world. I am not backing down whatsoever.
Yeah.
Or like even the radio message to George Russell when basically, because Alonso was trying to stay 5 seconds clear so that even if the penalty was reapplied, he would keep his podium position. Well, joke's on us. We all know that didn't happen. He actually did stay more than 5 seconds clear, regardless. Russell's radioing and basically being like, where am I at in comparison to Alonso? Like, I'm driving like mad. His engineer's like, we'll keep doing that. Like, keep driving like mad. Like, I'm not telling you where you're at. Just keep, like, heads down, focus. I did think that one was a particularly funny radio.
So they were saying that Max kept calling in saying something about the drive shaft or the gear shift or something. And I don't know if there was actually something going on in the car, because the Red Bull engineers kept coming back, and Christian got on the radio for a while and kept saying to Max, we don't see anything, you're good. And I don't know if they didn't want to create panic, but he kept being pretty adamant that he was sure something was wrong with the car. And I almost texted you, because especially when Checo started having problems, I was like, is Mary's double Red Bull DNF going to come through this race? Especially after, I would have felt so bad for Checo if we saw a DNF that late in the race, because there was only like 10 laps left when this was happening too.
Yeah, because I think whatever Max was complaining about was like a component of what they had to replace. And they're like, it looks okay. And he's like, but that's not what I'm complaining about. I'm actually feeling something different, like with a piece that's connected. I don't know how all these pieces fit together, but that's my interpretation of it.
And to be fair, I get why Max is a little peeved, because Perez ruined Max's first place streak, so he would have broken a record of the most consecutive first place race wins, and this obviously, with him not winning this race, puts his count back down to 0, which I'm sure we will see a good run from him again. But
I don't think that Max cares so much about the streak as he just wants to win.
Well, and it's kind of funny too, because I even heard the commentators make a remark about, we thought there was a chance that Max could win every single race this season. And I'm like, okay,
come on. Like, that's not even gonna
what?
Yeah.
That's ridiculous. That's not even fun. That's not fun for anyone.
No.
And I mean, this is on the heels of a weekend, right, where like he was set back due to a mechanical issue. Like, qualified 15th because of a problem with the car. So, I mean, I thought Max did have a great race. I can understand him still being pissed he didn't win. But.
Right. I think that just goes for like how well the Red Bull car has been built. That Checo's doing. I mean, Checo's obviously a good driver as well, but that the cars were so close. And I mean, just absolute savagery that Max took the fastest lap, the last lap of the race.
It was,
I absolutely adored it.
Like pure inter-team drama gold right there.
Yeah.
Also, when they were in that cool down room and Max finally entered and congratulated Alonso, did not speak to Checo. They have the 3 seats for the 3 finishers, and Max purposefully sat in Checo's chair in the middle.
Yeah, I saw that. I didn't really understand because I don't think that, because Alonso sat in
Max's chair. Yeah.
I don't know if he did that on purpose or not, but I just thought it was really funny that he was like, no, I'm still sitting in the middle seat.
I do think it's kind of funny. I also feel like they're probably just so exhausted by the end of the race that like you see a chair, you just sit down.
Yeah. I was kind of wondering about that as well, because like they were going up to the different podiums. They have like the waters and stuff on. I don't know. I feel like they're just kind of delirious, but
probably. But it's still funny. It's still funny. Especially since he hadn't talked to Checo at that point, and he just sits in his chair.
Just like, hey, I'm going to ignore you, but I am going to take your seat.
And your fastest lap.
Well, you know.
Yeah.
Salt in the wound.
I just did it. I don't know. Yeah.
Yep, just happened. Sorry.
Okay, but that's the other thing that kind of pissed me off about the FIA's ruling, right? Like, if you're going to make that ruling against Alonso, do it before the man goes out on the podium, right? Like, they have this whole celebration because not only was it a big deal for Checo because of the pole and, you know, him at what he thought was potentially taking the lead of the championship, right? Like, Checo's all jazzed. And then Alonso this would have been his 100th podium. So they kind of had like a little mini celebration for that alone almost. And then super awkward of like, hey, you're going to go up there. You're going to stand on the podium. We're going to take a million pictures. You're going to spray some champagne. And then, oh, by the way, it's George Russell, though.
It was pretty immediately after, too.
Yeah.
Like, it was within the same probably 5 minutes of me watching the whole podium ceremony. They made the announcement.
Like, you couldn't do it literally 5 minutes earlier and just, like, save everyone the awkward media time?
Yeah, I have no idea. That was a really odd one.
It just felt like, okay, you know you're probably going to do it. Just go ahead and do it.
Yeah.
Whatever.
I thought the really precious moment, too, was, I don't know if you saw when Checo got out, was obviously going over to the team. He, like, stopped at the Aston Martin team and, like, gave a bunch of hugs to everybody there because it was his team when he was driving for Force India. And so, like, a lot of the engineers, I'm sure, are the same engineers, but I thought that was really cute because they were, like, just as happy for him, too.
Yeah, and I feel like it is always kind of nice to see when people move teams that, like, the rest of the team, right? Because, like, we talk about this all the time. An F1 team is huge. You know, and so I feel like, and I think Danny Rick was kind of this way with some of his prior teams. Like, I think he actually did really upset a lot of people when he left Renault for McLaren. But I feel like when he left Red Bull, right, like he was still friends with a lot of people in the Red Bull garage.
Yeah.
So I feel like it is kind of cute to see drivers, like, with their old teams. And I feel like that's how even Pierre Gasly is with AlphaTauri, right? Like, you want them to kind of move on and do the next exciting thing for them. And I love that. Like,
yeah.
You know, small world, small paddock.
Sad Checo's dad wasn't at this race. Always love a good Checo's dad cam.
We do.
One other small thing, this is not nearly as exciting as discussing, obviously, the leaders of the pack, but there was an exchange between Magnussen and Yuki where Magnussen pulled ahead of him. He had been comfortably in 10th, and I know we were talking a lot about how Yuki's just not a consistent driver. I think this spoke to it again, but when Magnussen was able to secure the place and pull ahead, they played the clip of Yuki's radio, and he was just screaming.
Oh, gosh.
Which I think our pulse on the AlphaTauri garage and situation this year might be spot on.
Yeah, I think it is. I think this might be Yuki's last season.
KP,
if he doesn't really bring it up.
We need to use your, like, F1 access better and just be listening to the AlphaTauri radios because I'm sure it's hilarious.
Yeah, you can just sit on them. It's kind of fun. I like having, like, I know this is really intense now, but I like having the dual screen so I can watch the race, but they don't always, like, watch the people that I want to watch. Like, I don't always really care about, like, whatever driver they're focused in on, but we should definitely listen into some of those radios.
Because I'm not going to lie, I feel like being Yuki's engineer has got to be one of the worst jobs in the paddock. Right? You've got this intense headset on and you're just screaming. I would be so tempted to just take my earphones off and be like, you know what? Fuck you. Figure it out. Like,
I don't know how you keep your cool in that situation. Like, how many hours can you be yelled at and still just respond in such a calm manner? All engineers do, right? Like, they're always just like, copy, heard that. And then they'll just like,
understood. Yeah, understood.
Yep.
Understood. You just let a Haas pass you.
I feel like, okay, if I'm thinking about engineers for a moment, I think best person's engineer to be probably Max, right? Like,
you have to have some weird interpretations. So, like, his comes on like it's so low, and
that's
like,
true.
You can't understand Max.
I would have a really hard time
really
understanding Max.
Okay, I take that back. I feel like the best person to be their engineer for is probably Lewis or Alonso, because I feel like they're very clear on the radio.
Yeah,
like,
but
you
Lewis
can hear
would
what they're
drive
saying.
Me bonkers of his complaining. Oh God!
But like, you can hear them.
Yeah,
you can hear them.
Do you want to?
And like,
Alonso's a little aggressive too.
They both have their minuses. Guys, these are F1 drivers, right? Like, they all have tempers. But I think what would be cool about being either one of their engineers is I think that Alonso and Hamilton are such good drivers that they have more interesting conversations with their engineers. Like, I think they ask for other types of data and, like, they kind of do some on-track strategizing. Worst person, fucking Yuki. That man's just screaming constantly. Most depressing person, Leclerc. Imagine being Leclerc's engineer. Constantly being like, sorry, we literally can't help you. We shit the bed again. Your car's dying. Also, I just fucked up. Like, No new tires for you, Shaw. Another lap.
I would choose one of the new like rookie drivers that are going to be really polite to their engineers, like Mick Schumacher. He was always super nice to his engineers.
And you know what? He's not on the grid anymore.
Yeah, but you know what? If I were a race engineer, I want like Logan Sargent.
I was going to say, the Williams drivers seem like they're very polite.
I feel like Albon would be really nice.
Or De Vries. I feel like De Vries, I mean, granted, maybe I'm extrapolating a little too much, but he seems very professional. But I don't think it'd be interesting to be their engineers, right? Like,
I'm
maybe
not looking for interesting. I'm looking for how irritating are you to listen to and how mean are you to me. So I feel like I'm going to go with a rookie. Jacqueline, what are you going to pick?
Wait, which rookie?
Logan.
Narrow it down.
I feel like I would
Final answer, Logan.
Yeah.
Outside of this season, I would say Lando. I feel like Lando would be
that is
a
a great
person.
pick.
I feel like he's nice, like he's interesting, you know, he knows what he's doing. I think this season he's a little down
He'll be
in the
sad.
dumps.
He's going to be sad boy season.
He's a sad boy, but before I feel like I would pick like Lando.
That is a great choice.
Or Albon. I feel like
Albon would be a great choice too.
But also, granted, we haven't heard a lot of Albon's radio because he's not usually up on the grid, so he could be,
we can change that.
Can this be a new thing? Can we actually, like, spy on more drivers' radios and then... let's revisit this when we've done a little more research. Some firsthand listening.
Oh, sorry, did you want to circle back?
Add it to the agenda.
How long can we last listening to Yuki's radio?
Oh, that should be a punishment. Whichever one of us comes in, like, last in our predictions, that person should just be forced to listen to hours of Yuki's radio.
Jesus Christ. I was just going to say, like, one race you have to listen only from the perspective of Yuki.
That's still hours. I mean, these races take, like, 2 hours.
Yeah.
That'd still be, and then you wouldn't know what the heck is going on.
And make sure it's like,
and you have to watch it from the driver's cam where it's like bouncing.
Oh, God.
Jesus Christ. All right, let's hope that things turn around for me.
Well, speaking of predictions, ladies, I feel like it's time we settle up from last year.
I agree. Sort of. I mean, I'm not looking forward to mine, but I feel like I'd rather do mine than Jacqueline's.
We're going to have to climb a lot of stairs next weekend.
You are going to climb a lot of stairs. There's no we here.
Mary and I are just going to pop out like every 5 floors from the elevator. And be like, hey, how you doing?
How fun for me.
We'll send you up with a mini mic.
Oh, don't worry.
Jesus.
Catherine will be drinking out of a shoe, so...
I think we're all drinking out of a shoe.
Oh, no. No. It's just KP.
I think there are a couple other bets. We need to go back and listen because I think we've made a couple shoey bets.
Okay.
And I'm pretty sure at least all of us have to. I could be wrong. I'll
bring a shoe just in case.
We'll circle back. I know KP has to do one, but I'm pretty sure.
Got it.
I'm pretty sure I have to do one too, I think.
Well, cheers to that. And thank you so much for listening this week. If you like what you've heard, please be sure to leave us a review, subscribe to the podcast, and visit gridgals.com for links to all of our socials. We'd love to hear from you.
And that's the checkered flag for this episode. We'll see you back on the grid next week.